All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We will now begin today's webcast. My name is Andy, and before I begin, I have a few housekeeping items to take care of. Today's webinar, How to Use Personalized PR to Create Big Buzz for Your HR Business, is scheduled for 1 hour, including time for question and answer. After we complete the presentation, we'll go straight into Q&A, so please submit questions as they occur to you via the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar console. Due to the large number of attendees, the phone lines will remain muted throughout the presentation. We will make a recording of this webinar and the slides available to you via email following the webinar. This webinar is sponsored by Social Ears HR. Social Ears HR offers a radically different approach to search designed to get at the answers to questions that help human resource businesses discover and engage people in the conversations they're having that drive success. Joining us today is William Tincup of Tincup & Company, Heath Havlick, Media Relations for Fisher Vista Marketing, and Mark Williman, founder of HR Marketer and Social Ears. Mark, go ahead and take it away.
Andy, apologize everybody, I'm having technical difficulties. Thanks so much. We're going to jump into it in just a moment. I wanted to give some background as to how we selected the panelists. William Tincup is an interesting breed today. He's on the receiving end of a constant barrage of pitches as an influencer. So he really has the perspective today on what it's like to be in the media and have people constantly trying to get your attention. And he'll be talking about what works and what doesn't. Heath, on the other hand, is a leading media relations specialist at Fisher Vista. So she's on the pitching end, and she is trying to get the attention of folks like William and other journalists and influencers on a day-to-day basis. So I felt it would be a really neat group to put together. And myself, I just kind of had a front seat view of PR and marketing over the last 20 years, and I can provide some feedback there. So let's jump into the next slide. If you have comments, join us on Twitter today with this hashtag, or check back later. We'll be providing a lot of supporting information as well as links to information that is referenced during the webinar. So it's a good, we'll have all this gathered later and posted in the blog post, the whole stream. But if you have anything to say or have any comments or whatnot, just please use that hashtag so we can all follow it. All right, Andy. So this is going to be an interesting presentation today in the sense that PR is really, it's for everybody. You don't have to be a traditional public relations professional to be in the business of PR. If you have news that you're sharing on behalf of your company, you're in PR. And I think with social, that typically means all of us. And one of the first things we always tell people is, dear name, insert here, is not personalization. But unfortunately, this has really become the norm. And I noticed in our own HR Marketer software, there are two types of news distributions. There are those people that blast to the entire journalist universe of thousands of individuals. And there are those that take a little extra time to cherry pick a couple of meaningful journalists and send it out, or influencers. And the latter is always more effective. And I think that, what I always find really interesting is that it takes most organizations at least a week to craft their news release, to get all the approvals of their supervisors, perhaps even legal, or maybe the CEO or C-suite, and then they take 5 minutes to send it out. So I know that our panel can add some interesting stories around this. So William, what is your feeling about this topic?
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, the reason I wanted to be on the webinar is because you're right. I've been on the ad agency, PR agency side of things, and now I'm the intended recipient of a lot of pitches, and I think that we're on some levels. I think we're looking for ways from an email management or communication management to ding people. and we're looking for ways to manage our inboxes more efficiently. And so anything we can do to get kind of people out of our system, we're looking for that. And what I mean by that is like F name, first name, contact name, any of those types of triggers, we automatically know, like, red flag goes up, it's not for me, it was sent out to a bunch of people, you know, I can't interact with that, archive, delete, etc. And I think what's behind that is we just want our time back. If they don't care enough to be personal, if they don't care enough to actually send me something that's just to me, etc., then, you know what, I don't have time to respond. And I think some of that is dealing with we just want our time back. And the other is it's contiguous in that, and if no one that loves me sends me an HTML email, you know, no one. If I see an email that comes out of Salesforce.com or Marketo as examples, but it's generated from a big giant VAT database, etc., and it's sent to me, I just don't respond. I don't even care if they personalized it. I just don't respond because no one that loves me sends me HTML email. Again, I think the roots of that are somewhere in the space of I just want my time back, and so I'm looking for ways to get other people that don't have the time or inclination to be personal out of my ecosystem.
Yeah, and Heath, as somebody that is crafting these pitches to people like William on a day-to-day basis, what's your thoughts around this subject?
Well, my thoughts are that, you know, PR stands for public relations. That connotes a relationship or an attempt anyway to establish a relationship. So, you know, you're not going to get very far with being friends with people by just kind of doing a big mass drive-by hello in real life. And so you're certainly not going to establish good relationships and rapport with the people that you're trying to get your stories to by not personalizing, not taking the time to pay attention to them, to what their needs are, and actually becoming a source of information for them. I mean, the goal is for you to serve each other, you know, for it to be a mutually beneficial relationship, not, you know, just some hassle for them to have to wade through their email inboxes with all this garbage that they don't care about, like William was saying, you know, things that aren't targeted to them and things that aren't appropriate for them or in their readership.
Yeah, and that includes, by the way, everybody, the subject line of an email. I typically will craft a different subject line depending on the individual I'm sending it to. So right away they realize that it's something personal. So let's jump over to the next slide, Andy. So this is always kind of a shocking statement to people. If your press release email distribution list includes more than one person, well, it's too big. And okay, there's a little bit of humor around that, but generally speaking, you don't want to be doing mass distributions. It's interesting because when you look at email statistics, you know, prospecting emails to purchased HR lists typically get rates, open rates of about 5 to 10%, and click-through rates of maybe 0.5% to 2%. There's some better, there's some worse. That's typically the average that we see. Well, when you're sending your news release out to hundreds of individuals, the laws of email open rates and click-throughs don't go away. It's still there, so you're not going to likely get very much response. So this is something that William, Heath, and I put together a couple days ago, the slide you're looking at now. And you can read the copy. It is a pretty good pitch that follows a model that we suggest, which is really start off about you, meaning the person you're writing to, the other person, and then about me, meaning I'm sending out this pitch, a little bit about me, and then the purpose of the email and the call to action. So William, I know that you have some strong opinions around this type of format, so why don't you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'm a huge formula person. I like actually bringing these types of communications down to some type of formulaic level. And I think if we start with the know thy audience moniker, whenever you're communicating to 1 or 100,000, what is that? What know thy audience? What do they actually care about? So for me, as a recipient of something that's personalized, I want to know that they've cared enough to be personal. They've looked me up on LinkedIn. We might be connected via Facebook. They've Googled me. I don't care. I just want to know that you've actually taken the step to know something about me. And in fact, as a for example, I got pitched a job the other day, actually, from a very large payroll HRS company, and it was a cool job at all, but it was a job, and I emailed back or LinkedIn back the recruiter, and I'm like, "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure that this company really wants to hire me? Like, are you sure? Sure." And I gave them a bunch of links for them to go look me up at, and I did that on one level because I wanted to make sure that they were really targeting me because it wasn't personal, but I also wanted to interact with the recruiter in a different way. So I think the thing is know thy audience. You start there, and in this formula, you can model the formula differently depending on what you're really trying to achieve or what is the objective of the communication. But I like having at the very beginning of an email, because I believe you have about 8 seconds with a person in the email to either gets archived or deleted or some type of action might be taken. So that personalization layer, I think, needs to go closer to the top, maybe even in the subject heading line. And then something I think that's equally important is layering in something about you. You know, I attended USC, you know, we're on Facebook together, whatever, but something that kind of ties me back to, you know, A, you've done personalization, but B, you know, I'd like to know more about you. So it's starting to build that trust or that relationship in the two first paragraphs or sentences, if you will. And then where a lot of pitches kind of fail is they kind of drone on about like something, but you've gone 3 paragraphs in and your eyes are crossed and you don't really know, like, why am I reading this? And so that, again, the person's hovering. I believe if you visualize that person is hovering over the delete key, it's better because their finger is on the delete key as they're reading your pitch. So the purpose of the email is 2 or 3 sentences. I'd like for you, you know, the reason I'm emailing you today is ... And in the last paragraph, I think 80% of the pitches fail for me is they don't tell me what they want from me. Like specifically, I'd like for you to do this, William, 15 minutes of your time, meet at a conference, you know, be on your podcast, whatever it is. I'd like to know what that is. So the formula elements can change depending on what you're trying to achieve, and I think that's getting back to the root of what is the objective of your communication. So for me, Mark, I love this formula, but I love formulas. And I think if you modify the formula, it's okay, but just have some of these elements in there.
Yeah, and one thing, Heath, I'm going to get your feedback in just a moment on this, but another thing is don't feel you have to cut and paste your entire press release if it's a press release that you're doing some pitching on in the email. It's probably online. I'm sure you've posted it at least on your own website. You may have sent it out over a wire service. Write the pitch, the personalized pitch, and then for supporting information, you can link out to the press release where there may be screenshots if it's a new software feature, product launch, photos if it's a new hire, but don't just put the press release, you know, feel you have to put it in the email. And certainly don't just put the press release and nothing else in the email. We see a lot of that, and it's just, come on, that's really not appropriate. So Heath, you have had tremendous success over the years in building relationships. It doesn't mean every pitch you send out is going to get a reply or get action, but talk about some of the tricks you use and what seems to work the most in getting these relationships established with the media and influencers.
Well, I mean, really, you can say that it's tips and tricks, but I think it just comes down to being a human being and, you know, thinking again about what it means to build an actual relationship with someone and not just think of them as, oh, you know, that's the person that I need to do something for me, but, you know, it's more about, you know, how can we help each other? And you know, part of that, as William said, is getting to actually know the person as a human being and finding out what they're like, what makes them tick. I follow various different journalists and influencers on Twitter, and so, you know, I get to know their kids' names and, you know, see what they wore for Halloween and all this sort of thing. And so, you know, on Twitter, I communicate with these folks a good bit, and it's most of the time it's not about PR, it's not about HR topics, it's just about kind of daily life and funny things we found online and, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's a really good way that I found to not just build rapport, but to sort of keep it going, to keep you top of mind to them so that they, you know, remember who you are. You're not the only person who's sending out, you know, something that you want covered. These people are inundated with stuff all day long. And so anything that you can do to, you know, be a differentiator really in their inbox is really helpful. So yeah, that's a really good thing.
And I've
you know,
seen
you can provide good, oh sorry, I was just going to say, you know, provide good stuff. Again, take the time to see what's relevant to their readership. Just because their publication has the word HR in the title, you know, doesn't mean they're all going to cover the same things. People have specific focuses. You know, specific journalists and editors within a publication have different focuses. So, you know, you really need to do your homework.
Yep. And I've seen, Heath, your desk where you have a whole separate monitor for your Twitter. It's kind of scary, but you're clearly monitoring the conversations. Let's jump to the next slide, Andy, and get into the steps of really what we're talking about here. There's really 3 key steps that we're going to run through. Identify the relevant contacts. Become familiar with them, as we just spoke about a little bit, and then tips and tricks on communicating and engaging. So let's jump into identifying the relevant contacts. Now, I know, William, from a conversation yesterday, you have some strong opinions on doing this effectively because not everybody's relevant. So I want to start with you.
Yeah, I think you know, there's degrees, and I think the thing is, the worst thing you can possibly do is treat everybody equally. I subscribe to the Jimmy Johnson School of Leadership, where, you know, in whatever you're trying to achieve, there are stars, and then there are other players, and so you treat them differently. Back when he ran the Cowboys, he didn't treat Michael Irvin and Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith the same as he did the other, you know, 50 guys on the team. You can hate him or love him for that, but he treated people differently. And I think a lesson that can be learned from that is that when let's say you're coming up on a conference, and you've got a list of 100 people that you'd like to reach out to. You know, really, 10 of those are more important than the other 90. And it's being critical about that, and what is really important to your client or to yourself as a company. Who are we really trying to influence? Who are we really trying to have a conversation with, build some type of relationship, etc., as a for example. So it's not treating everybody the same, which sounds a little, you know, it sounds, I guess, a little not as humane as I'd like for it to, but my point is it's actually being critical about your list and maybe separating that into critical versus important, meaning if we go to this show and we don't meet with these 10 people, we didn't achieve our success. We met with the other 90, but we didn't meet with the 10. And so it's having a critical eye to then be discerning about your list and not treating everybody the exact same way.
Yeah, and well, I'm going to take a different angle on this about relevancy, and that is that, let's say you have I'm just going to make something up. You have a release going out today on some sort of executive coaching story, product, whatever. You're going to have your saved distribution list, all the key people at HR Executive or LRP and talent management. You know, you're going to have a list of people that are usually on all of your news distributions, and hopefully you're personalizing that to some extent. But you're also, you know, in today's world, there are thousands of influencers online, and influence is topic specific. So there are lots of people engaged day to day in the topics surrounding coaching, leadership development, executive coaching that are probably not on your standard list. So find out. There's lots of free software you can use out there that can tell you a list of people on social that are actively engaged in a particular topic. So identify some of the topics that your news relates to, and go on to social and use tools to find out who's talking about these topics. And although you might not have a relationship with them, you can begin to build that relationship and try to get some interest in whatever it is that you're pitching. And that doesn't include people necessarily who are only authoring content like blogs and articles on your topic, but those who are actively engaged in sharing it. There are a lot of key influencers out there by topics that never write anything original, but they have a lot of influence just through their popularity online and being an information source. So every list is going to be different. So Heath,
Yeah, and I would
go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say don't be married to your distribution list. That's something, yeah, that everybody in PR does. I mean, that they have to do as part of their job is to create these distribution lists. So, don't get so stuck in your thinking that these are the 12 people or the 20, publications that I reach out to, and that is all, or even that everyone on that list is appropriate for every release or every, content campaign that you send out. Because I have clients who write on a variety of topics, or who, what they do reaches into a lot of different aspects of HR, and so not every person is going to be appropriate, for every one of those content pieces. So yeah, of course your distribution list is the place where you start from, but yeah, then go out and find people who are talking about that particular topic, right now, people maybe you haven't heard of before, online influencers and bloggers and analysts, and reach out to those people as well.
Yep. Okay, let's go to step 2, which is become familiar with them. And William's already touched upon this a little bit, as has Heath. And it's funny because when I got into PR, gosh, I don't want to say how long ago, but for the first year or so, we were still faxing press releases to newsrooms, and we didn't know anything about people. I mean, unless the magazine had a decent bio of somebody in the masthead, or we saved all the archives of the publications to see what they may have written about in the past, we really didn't know much about people. It was just we're kind of operating in the dark. But yet we took a lot of time to craft the releases and do the follow-up work, a lot of it on phone. Now fast forward to today, and we have more information than we can possibly ever use. As Heath said earlier, I mean, she knows the Halloween costumes that some of her contacts' children, had. So there is a ton of information. You can go on free services, of course, LinkedIn, usually people's bios. But what's happened, at least what I've seen happen, is we're not using it effectively. It's almost led to a just shooting from the hip every day and reaching out and there's not much personalization, even though we don't have any excuses for it. And William, we were just talking about this yesterday, and you started the webinar off talking about how frustrating it is for you when people don't know anything about you and they reach out to you. So we have all these tools. How do you manage them? Because we do have a lot of information on people. How do you use that effectively?
Well, you're right. I have the same frustration you have, that years ago in the mid-90s I worked in PR, and you didn't have visibility, insight into the audience. And so you had to find other ways to become, because it's still the same game of being personal, but we just didn't have the tools that we have right now. Anybody that isn't personal right now, they fall into, for me, and I'm just speaking for myself, they either fall into a bucket where they're lazy or naive or they're incompetent or whatever, but they're spraying and praying. And I don't want, in my ecosystem, I don't want anybody that falls into any of those buckets, but more specifically the lazy bucket. In regards to me, and I think there's a whole lot of people like me, you can't be too personal. You just can't. You know my kids' names? Great. I think that's fantastic. It's not awkward. It's just a part of life, and I think that showing that you know their names and even highlighting, an Instagram photo that you really like of them or something like that, I'm now involved. Now we're together, because now you cared enough to be personal, and you cared enough to do your research, and now I'll care enough about what you have going on.
William, how does that backfire? I mean, it can really come across. I mean, it's not like we're advocating. Everyone's going to go out now and say, "Hey, William, saw the picture of your kids. It looked really great. By the way, can you invite me onto your radio show next week? I have a great story to tell."
I think no, you're right. I think it's as true as it was 15 years ago in PR as it is today, that you have to connect the dots. If you ever wanted a journalist to write a story 15 years ago, the rule was do the research. Actually almost write the story. Highlight where the story has been done in a couple different places, provide some content, and provide how the story could be different if they were to take on the story, etc. You basically did about 80% of the work and then handed it over to a journalist, and if they took interest, then they might take your story on and complete the task, etc., and put their own spin on it, etc. So I think that connecting the dots where people use bad segues. Yeah, I'm not gonna give them a whole lot of credit for using terrible segues. So I think in that instance, Mark, it's, hey, saw photos of your kids. Here's something about me. By the way, the reason I'm emailing you, and there's a couple segues. There's a couple transitions in there where they're building a story. And I know Heath's got a lot of content around. We still buy off. We still believe in the concept of stories. So what is your story? Like, why am I caring? And we're really talking about how you get past that hovering, over the delete key.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people are probably thinking, who has the time? Because everything we're talking about so far is not 5 minutes. It's not a click send and have it blast out to 1,000 journalists and maybe 2 call back, great, I got a story. That may be effective, and we're not saying necessarily, which we'll get into later, don't do that, but this does take time, but I think you'll find it's really worth it. And not every pitch has to be a pitch. As like he said earlier, it could just be a comment on article they wrote. Hey, great article today, Todd, at ERE. I really enjoyed it. Nothing else. It's all part of a process of building a relationship. Heath, do you have anything to add? Become familiar with them before we jump over to communicate and engage?
Yeah, I would say too, to your point about it taking more than 5 minutes, that really what we're looking for at this point is quality versus quantity. You're not going to do this for 100 people. You're going to do this for the people who that you've paid attention to, that you've narrowed down and said, these are the people that are important. These are the people who I really want to reach out to, who I know that the story is relevant for them. And so, I've spent up to an hour sometimes looking online and finding out if this particular journalist, who's listed as someone who studies or who writes about, benefits administration, for instance, if that person writes on it on a regular basis. If so, what were the last couple of articles that they wrote? Really find out, is what they're doing going to mesh with what I'm trying to give them. But so again, it doesn't always take an hour, but I'm just saying it can take a while for you to figure out, who's going to be the right person. But again, you narrow it down and you become familiar with who these people are in terms of what they do. You can know all sorts of things. You can know their kids' names and etc. But if the pitch is not right for what they do and what they write about, then you've wasted your time.
Yeah, and always keep in mind, whoever you're pitching, they have customers too. It's called their readership, whether it's their own blog or whether it's the publication that they're employed at. And anything you can do to make their job easier and to improve their product, which is the content they're creating, they're going to appreciate that. And that's always something to keep in mind, and I think sometimes we lose sight of. Let's jump over to step 3, which is communicate and engage. So again, the 3 steps, you'll go out and you identify your relevant contacts for the news that you're pitching today, and then you're going to become familiar with them. Now it's time to reach out and communicate and engage. And it doesn't just have to be by email. We haven't mentioned phone today, but believe it or not, there's still a lot of reporters, major pubs and regional ones that still appreciate the phone call. So get to know the person. How do they like to be communicated with? Oftentimes they tell you online. Other times you can find out. But it's not necessarily email, and it also can be things like commenting on their articles. There's not really a difference about blogs and articles. I just call it HTML publishing. But most websites today, whether it's a blog, whether it's an article, they allow for comments. Those are great opportunities to get your name out there and build relationships, and retweeting some of the things that your contacts are tweeting. So Keith, why don't you continue on, since you were kind of touching upon this very subject, and tell us some of your, I don't want to say tips and tricks, but what you find the most useful in terms of communicating and engaging with people you're reaching out to.
Well, one of the things that I can talk about is something that was referenced earlier when you showed, kind of the 4-step model that people can use when they're sending out a pitch, is that I do try to pay attention to what people have been writing about lately, or what the publication has been writing about lately. I have a big data client, and so recently I was pitching a content piece for them, and I looked at a pretty important HR network that I thought for sure would have a ton of information on that topic, and as it turned out, there was very little information, and anytime I could find reference to it, to big data mentions, it was always just a small snippet in some other article. And so in my pitch I said, hey, I noticed that you mentioned big data throughout your network and these little spots, but you haven't actually done a full story. Here's a story that I think would be really interesting to you. And so that's a way that I can communicate, hey, I'm paying attention to what it is that you do, and here is kind of a solution for you, or here's a bigger piece of it for you.
Yeah.
And then commenting on blog posts is a good way also to let people know that you're tracking them, or tracking with them rather, not stalking them, but paying attention to what they're doing.
Yeah, and actually we'll talk about it a little bit later, is the commenting on blog posts actually has some SEO value as well. If you do it professionally, not great article and then immediately link to something of your own, it's probably going to be filtered out anyway. But if you really add to the discussion and then as the supporting information say, here's a link to a white paper we recently wrote that goes deeper into this topic, that's a great way to build visibility, especially in really active communities like on LinkedIn, the HR Technology Conference, which you have to ask to join, and if you get approved and you're in there, they don't accept promotions, but there's a lot of influencers that are highly engaged in that group, and it's another great way just to build relationships and get your name out there and share useful information. So, William, before we jump on to the next, do you want to add anything to the communication?
You bet. I got 4 notes. One is sharing is caring. If you actually care, then caring takes time. So there's a couple of things there, but sharing is caring. So you want to engage with an audience, and you want to share what they've got going on. You want to care enough about sharing what they have going on. I think the hardest part of that is not everything you do has an agenda. So when you actually go and kind of mentally move over there and say, you know what, I'm going to actually care about this subject matter or these influencers, etc. I'm going to share some of the things that they have going on, etc. Not every transaction needs to have an agenda. Not every comment needs to have your full contact information and a call to action, etc., or tie it back to an objective. So some of this is you actually need to unshackle yourselves from that. If you really care and you are going to share, you don't necessarily have to have an objective for every single transaction. And commenting on blogs is a great for example. You don't need to put a signature line in a comment in a blog at all. And so I think that this goes under that kind of the moniker sharing is caring. Secondly, PR is not email marketing. And somewhere along the way we kind of lost sight of this. That great PR is about great relationships. It's about people. And it's about actually connecting with one another. And email marketing is not. And there's going to be a lot of people that will try to sex that up and church that up and make email marketing about humanity, but it's really not. So the thing is understanding that when we blast out and do a PR message out like an email marketing blast, that it's going to have about the same success rate or lower than traditional email marketing. So we just got to keep that in the back of your mind. And then the last note I got is around mediums. Really paying attention to understanding, this goes under the know thy audience part, understanding the mediums in which someone wants to communicate with you. So like when you have a journalist that you've built a great relationship with and you've really been able to kind of connect a couple things with them, how do you like communications? Do you like to be on the phone? Great. Well, you know what? I don't need to email you then. I don't need to direct message you in Twitter or send you a LinkedIn note or Skype chat or any other smoke signals or whatever, any other ways. I want to get to know the audience and how they ultimately like to be their communications. And so you ask them a question. I think it's a totally appropriate, hey, you know what, I don't want to send you emails if you're not an email person. How do you like communications? And letting them drive. That's a part of that one-to-one marketing. Like, how do you like things? I'll fit around how you like things. So that's what I would add to the conversation that we've already had on this slide.
I think that's brilliant. I love that, and you know, I love to be clear. That's my favorite thing. You know, clarity is a beautiful thing, and in our database for HR marketer, and that's not meant to be a commercial. It's just an example. We will have sections, you know, in the notes for the different journalists. You know, as we know this, as the information becomes available. You know, this person does not want phone calls, or you know, this magazine tends to hate email. So that is really so good to be able to parse that out. And yeah, just ask. I mean, people I think would be happy to tell you the way that they prefer to be communicated with.
Excellent. Let's jump over to the next slide. So this is a chart that we put together. It kind of states the obvious, that if you're spraying and praying, blasting out your news release to hundreds or worse, and I hope no one does this, to over 1,000 journalists, the time investment in doing that is really low. I just cut and paste my news release into the software and hit go, and bang, it's out. But so is the effectiveness. And when you go to the other opposite quadrant of the time being fairly, considerably more, but the effectiveness being very high and the targeting obviously being high, that's more personalized PR. And it's interesting, a timely article, I had never heard of, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Maria Popova. She's a young journalist, I guess you call her, that founded a website called Brain Pickings. Have you heard of that site, William?
I have indeed.
Yeah, it was covered in the New York Times on this past weekend. It's one of the most visited sites on the entire internet. She's really creating this media empire, doing some very interesting things online. And she essentially started off with a blog, just sharing very useful, somewhat eccentric information. But what I found useful about the article in the New York Times is how she's so disciplined with her time. And she's tweeting like 50 times a day, and writing 2 blog posts or updates on her site a day. And what I found fascinating was that she does it all, and she does most of her social in the morning in a 1-hour period. And she sets up all of her tweets, and they're not just all promotions. It's actually, well thought out tweets, in some cases sharing other people's stuff, in some cases her own. But she just tees them all up and times them using software that allows you to time it during the course of the day, and then goes over and writes a couple of blog posts. But I think the key that I took away from that, which I've tried to follow myself, is everything we've spoken about today, it does take time. But if you turn it into a process, a disciplined process where you're setting aside a certain amount of your day every day, you would be amazed at, if you have the right tools, what you can do in 60 minutes a day as far as your outreach on social and William, I mean, you're on all the time. I mean, you have well over 100,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know how you do it, but a lot of times people say, no, automation is bad. But if you use it right, there are a lot of tools out there that can really help you do the stuff that we're talking about. What are some that you use, and how would you just comment on managing all this, because it does take more time?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think it has to fit you. I think that's the thing about automation, or using tools, or using robots, or in my case, I have an entire call center in Indonesia that does a lot of the social for me. Just kidding. I think the thing is it's got to work for you. It's when it's disingenuous, or it doesn't, work for your brand or what you're trying to achieve. I use a formula for me that basically says, I want to share other people's content 10 times for everything that I share of myself. So if I've got a Fistful of Talent blog post, for example, I'll promote that, and I'll promote, as it relates to that, because I think people are probably interested in that. I think the shelf life of an article is much longer than we give it credit. Because if you notice anything in social, you notice that everything kind of pops up and it's really interesting, and then it just goes away, because we have the attention span of goldfish. And so what most people do is they put a lot of thought and time and energy into writing thoughtful content, webinar content, white paper content, articles, whatnot, and then they promote it once and then it's done. And then they kind of move on to something else. And I think, for me personally, I write an article. I don't write as often as a lot of folks, but I write an article, and I'll promote that article every day for a month. So I'll promote. There's a longer tail of promotion for an article for me than what typically happens in our ecosystem. So I think that is a nugget. But I think the automation using different technologies, TweetAdder or the Twitter feed or Manage Flitter. There's a bunch of great ones that are out there. All those technologies do about the same thing. You know, Sprout Social. They all do about the same thing. It's being comfortable with whether or not you want to use technologies. Like, I only use native apps other than when I schedule something. So like I use Hootsuite for example, to promote an article. I'll go into Hootsuite and I'll promote it for 30 days. And so I'll set up those different, outbound, if you will, communications. But that's the only time I use Hootsuite. I use Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, the native apps themselves, pretty much all the time. But I want to get back to one of the things that's on the slide as it relates to spray and pray. The hardest part about spray and pray is managing the expectations, the internal expectations that we have, either with the rest of the people on the marketing team or the executives, et cetera, is, okay, we're going to send this out to, let's say 40,000 journalists or 100,000 journalists. If we're sending them a press release, no one's going to respond to that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is internally what I think what happens is people have expectations that we send out a press release and someone's just going to mystically pick up that story and run with it. And I don't believe in mysticism. I don't believe in voodoo, even though I am, even though I could, I guess. I think the thing is there's a reason you use the press release system and you want to distribute that to a larger audience. It's taking time to manage the expectations internally that we're doing that. That's an activity that will tick it off the box, but it's not necessarily going to get us a return in like building a relationship. So I think it's almost stratifying. We want to build relationships with these people, and we've already talked about that stuff. And we're going to tick this off the box because, yeah, we actually do want to put this press release in front of a much larger audience. No one will do anything with that. Or maybe broken clock's accurate twice a day. Maybe somebody will. So we'll still do that. But it's managing the expectations internally.
Yeah. And again, you take all this time to write the release, put some extra time into actually doing something with it, and I can't stress that enough, William.
And I think too, the reason that this chart is so good is that you see, the coming together of time and effectiveness, and the question is, do you want to look busy? Do you want to be able to show your direct report, at the end of the day, oh, look, here's what I did. Here's all these people I sent this press release to. Or do you want to actually get results? That's really what it comes down to. So are you trying to save time and in the process being ineffective? Or are you going to, change the way your brain works and take that extra time, not reach as many people, but get better results?
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit. We have just a couple more slides left, and we're going to get into some questions. But I want to move over to the next slide on a related topic, which is optimize your content. And now I'm getting into specifically press release distribution. If you're putting it online, press release is content. Yes, it's not email marketing, as William spoke about, but it's still content. And that means if it's going online, it has to be optimized. Anything you're putting online in HTML can be optimized. And Andy has sort of a funny story to tell, which I'm sure he'll jump in a moment and share with us. But we see a lot of releases go out, and you can just go on to major wire services, and you just see these releases with no embedded hyperlinks. Click here to access whatever it is that they're promoting. My goodness, it doesn't take that much effort. It's not rocket science, but be sure to optimize your content when you're sending it out, and that includes keyword selections. There's lots of tools, our own Social Ears has it, where you kind of analyze your content and it suggests a bunch of other topics or extended keywords that relate to the topics in your release that tend to show up with topics that are in your release, and get them in, because it's really remarkable how it does make a difference. Even with Google's Penguin and Panda updates, it's still important to have the right keywords in your release. But again, and Andy, I don't know, are you still, are you
Yeah.
Funny story you shared with us yesterday.
I am here, and this is one of these frustrating things that I see regularly on releases. Basically the idea is if somebody goes to Google and types in a keyword or phrase, what are those keywords or phrases that you would like to rank well for? Well, let's take the example of click here. So I went to Google and I typed in click here and did a search on that. And the #1 result for that is a very clever PR and marketing agency that decided to name themselves Click Here. Because you know what? That is probably the most used link out on the web right now. And looking at my Google result, currently there are more than 9.3 billion results for Click Here. So guess what? If you're using Click Here as a link, you're not going to rank for it. There's no way. It just ain't going to happen. So choose something that means that you would want to rank for, that if somebody goes to Google and types that in, gee, wouldn't it be great if you came up on page 1? So yeah, you're just not going to rank for Click Here.
Yeah, so don't use Click Here. Let's move over to the next slide, which is really one of our staff writers who posts a lot in our blog, Eric Anderson, first made us aware of this great article, which I think he'll probably be tweeting about in a moment, that gave us the idea for the white paper in today's session, which was slow PR. And it's really what we're talking about today. You take your time. It's a little bit slower, but ironically, it isn't, because you're also likely to get a lot more results, and things will start to happen fairly quickly. And we're going to have a great example in just a moment of that. But it's time and speed, but you can get a lot of action quickly if you practice this method by jumping on what's hot, taking your time, understand people, select your contacts, then communicating, and then things can happen really quickly. William, you have anything to add along this, and then we're going to get into an example.
Yeah, really quickly, I think it's, be thoughtful, be humane, and something that Heath brought up earlier is that, as she talked about, cares about, and understanding the nuances of cared about, historical, and cares about, meaning current. We need to do a better job of understanding, historically they cared about these things over there. That's great. There's some context that we can weave back into the story. But what do they really care about now? Like, what have their last 20 tweets been about? Like, so personalizing and understanding the differences between cares about and cared about.
Yeah. Keith, anything to add? Otherwise, we're going to move over to a success story, which you can talk about.
No, let's move on.
Okay. So we had a great example which kind of summarizes how all this can be successful. But I want to talk about, just for a moment, a term we coined called topic jacking. Some of you might be familiar with newsjacking. It's something that David Meerman Scott, author of the Internet Marketing Guru, wrote about in his book on that topic, newsjacking, where what you're doing is you're in some ways piggybacking on a channel-specific or influential or popular information to amplify your own content or brand by association. And topic jacking sort of takes it to another level, where you're identifying trending topics right now in the news and certainly crafting your release around that topic, but then actually going out and engaging with the influencers and mentioning them in your own tweets or your own blog post on the subject. Whatever you call it, it really is effective. And Heath has a great example of a client she was working with and how this all kind of played out. So Heath, go ahead and tell us the example about the background screening company.
Okay, yeah, actually that was one of our co-workers, and she has a client who does background screening, and she had just started to promote a piece of content on that topic. And so she looked in social layers and saw that employee screening was a trending topic. So she clicked on it. She saw that there was a bunch of people talking about and sharing this article on how some employers are now requiring job applicants to give them their Facebook passwords. So, of course, that's a controversial topic. And so she then was able, through the software, to look at who was talking about things, find some influencers who were talking about that topic, and communicated with those people and sent them a link to the content piece. Well, as a result of that, someone wrote a blog post about the content piece the next day. You know, one thing leads to another, and that piece ended up being talked about on MSNBC and the Today Show.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that story is the report that her client had produced, really, that wasn't the focus of the report, was necessarily on, you know, employers asking their candidates for their Facebook passwords, but it related to the topic, and it just, by chance, they discovered this opportunity, jumped into it, and did some commenting on blog posts and some tweets that kind of tied into that trending topic. And it just, really, it was about, because of that, you're now in that conversation. So many more people are seeing you, and that's how she ultimately got the visibility. But it's topic jacking, news crafting, news jacking, whatever you call it. It works both ways. So not only can you tie your release into a trending topic right now online, but you can do the opposite. You can find out what's trending and then craft your release or blog posts on that topic, at the same time reference some of the more popular existing conversations on that topic. It works both ways. And William, I'm sure you've had some success in this.
Yeah, I think that vendors, Mark, should do more of this. Actually, I think that we have a lot in the social HR community, social recruiting community, and I think they're really comfortable about sharing content and jumping in, on other people's tweets or forwarding things in Facebook or whatever. But the vendor community, for whatever reason, they either kind of stay out or they're afraid to kind of jump in and be a part of those conversations. I think this is a great way to start that process of building a relationship and being seen as a human as well, not just a company that sells software or services to an audience. I think it's a great way to interact with a much larger audience. So I love the concept.
Yeah. Let me let's jump on to the next slide and then wrap up and take some questions. There's an infographic we put together, which I think everybody will find really useful. And it essentially says, great, you've created this piece of content, and hey, a press release can be a piece of content. But whatever it is, article, white paper, you create this piece of content, what do you do with it? And this is a pretty fun way to look at 14 different things you can do to maximize the distribution or exposure of your content, which would be in addition to some of the more personal outreach that we spoke about during today's session. But it's pretty cool. And again, if you put this into a process, a disciplined process, that, okay, whenever we have a new piece of content or a press release, let's just check off and make sure we're doing these things. Trust me, if you do it, you're going to be impressed. You will see a jump in all kinds of things, from your own brand visibility to increasing retweets, increasing shares, increasing mentions, increasing likes. It all moves, and followers and things like that, if you're just religious about doing this every time you have a new piece of content. So check it out. It's pretty cool. Little infographic. And Andy, you can go on to the last slide. We'll be putting up a copy on the SlideShare of today's presentation. There'll also be a recording that anybody, I believe, can access, which should be hopefully coming out sometime today. But let's wrap up, and if we have any questions for our panelists, we can jump into that.
We do. Let me start off with this because I think it's probably something that a lot of folks are thinking about, but maybe some don't want to ask. And this is, when does personalization get creepy?
That's got to be so individual. I'm not the best person, so I'm going to let William take a shot at that, although his threshold is probably a little higher than most people.
It is. It is. But you know what? It is indeed on so many levels. But the thing is here's the thing. You know thy audience. If you see that person, Andy, and they're all over the web, and they occupy the first 18 pages of Google when you search their name, that turns out they're probably over the web. Their threshold is probably pretty high. meaning you can be as personal as you'd like to be. I think if you do that same search and they don't occupy the first 3 rankings in Google, then you probably need to dial back your personalization. You still need to know something about the person. So I'll start with the kernel. You still need to do a Google search. You still need to go into LinkedIn and know something. You went to Berkeley, fantastic. I went to Berkeley as well. We were 10 years apart, so we didn't crisscross. But you know what? We have this in common. I don't think that's creepy. I don't think that's going to be creepy for anybody. But I think the way that you're going to need to make this is match the audience. And I think a way to do that is to find out how, I don't want to use the word savvy, but just how open are they on the web, as opposed to more transparent, more open on the web versus a little bit more controlled or closed off.
It's really just judgment. I mean, it's one thing to dig back 3 years in somebody's blog archives and find out they had a quick mention maybe of a difficult personal situation they went through, like a divorce, and then out of the blue saying, hey, I got I'm going through divorce too, come on. I mean, that's creepy, right? But if you're actually bringing relevance to what they're talking about today, or maybe a school they went to, you comment on, hey, I went to, at Notre Dame as well. Isn't it exciting, what they're at? But it's also how much you know the person. You don't start off completely cold calling somebody and getting personal. That may not be the best approach. You keep it business-like, and personal, though, doesn't have to be about their family life. It could be just about some of the articles that they've written in the past, and say, hey, I've been following your column for a number of years. Love what you're writing about, especially blah, blah, blah. I mean, just as Heath said, I think, be a human being. Just communicate, use good judgment, and if you think it's creepy, don't do it, because it probably is creepy.
Yeah, saying, oh, what a beautiful daughter you have is one thing. Saying, oh, what a beautiful daughter you have. I want to date her when she grows up. That's creepy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So what advice would you give to someone who hasn't used these techniques, these personalized PR techniques, but wants to begin doing so? Where do they start?
It's a good question, and we, I believe, and maybe Eric can find it, we wrote a white paper recently on that topic, something 101. He can tweet about it, but you gotta, I think a lot of what we're talking about is social. So I assume you're on. If not, get on. Get yourself a Twitter account, whether it's yours or your company's. Start to observe how really successful people handle themselves online. Start commenting on other people's blogs. But the best place to start is, baptism by fire with a press release. When you have a press release, here's what you do. You look at your press release and find out what topics are related to it. Go online. Try to find some influencers that seem to frequently talk about that, and share your news in a professional way with them. You can also go out and find some existing articles and blogs that were written in the last couple of months on the topics in your release, and comment on them, or reach out to the bloggers. But just get your feet wet, start doing it. And if you're in marketing and PR, you'll probably be a quick study about this and get up to speed. But I just say get out there and start to do it. I mean, what do you think, William?
Yeah, it's baby steps. You got to start somewhere, and I think that you're right. The moment you got your press release down, you think of that objective, who's the audience, and then you start thinking, okay, how do I want to start? And you just pick up the phone, send the email. You just start with, the baby steps, and you're learning and you're iterating as you're doing it. And so maybe the first 3 outreaches didn't go your way, but on the 4th one it will, and that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, and William, excuse me for a moment, but that's a good point, and that is, if I don't know how many people are on today's webinar, but if it's consistent with stats we see, over half are not doing personalized pitches for their news release, or just blasting out their news release. So where do you start? Don't do that the next time you have a release. Actually take the time to find a half a dozen or dozen people and actually writing, like that slide earlier, a well-crafted personal pitch. See what happens. My hunch is you're going to like the results. And so those are the baby steps to start with, is actually writing a pitch, personalized pitch. Try to be personal and not creepy.
All right, everybody. That we are just past the top of the hour, so I think we've got to wrap this up. As was mentioned earlier, we will make a recording of the webinar available via email. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and William, Heath, and Mark, thank you all for your time today. Everybody
Thanks,
have a great
Andy.
day.
Yes, thanks, William, very much for joining us, and Heath for your contributions. Appreciate it very much.
Great to be here.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.